back to my channel. Today on Hitch In, I want to talk about something just a little bit different than what we have been talking about, which has been homemaking and some homesteading. Today I want to cover a little bit about homeschooling, and I'm hoping to do a more in-depth piece on this later. But for right now, I want to just kind of do just a little talk through what I have been doing for about the last 12 years. So let's get into it. First, I want to give you a sort of backstory about how we became homeschoolers, because if you know me, which many of you do, but if you know me, you know I wasn't always a Christian. So Christian education was not a thing that I was concerned with. I didn't even really want children, if I'm being honest. And so for me to go from a career woman to a stay-at-home, homeschooling, homemaking, homesteading mom is the most radical thing I could have ever done. I have a long testimony, and I would love to share that with you guys someday. But the Lord has richly blessed me in turning over my ideals and giving them to Him and saying, "Here, Lord, what would you have me do with this life that you're giving me?" And I feel like I want to start, or I think that I should start by saying that we were not going to homeschool. I was not even going to have children. So when I had a surprise child, another part of my testimony, that it was just normal for me to want to drop him off and let someone else take care of him. That's pretty much how it was. And I'm just going to be brutally honest here. So, I don't do trigger warnings or anything like that. If you feel offended by something, you need to ask yourself, is this thing really offensive because it's offensive, or am I offended because I'm feeling convicted? And then if it's if the answer is no to both of those, then don't be offended. So, I've had to go through a lot of that myself and be like, well, this actually doesn't apply to me, or it does, and I should be doing something about it, and that's why I feel bothered. So, well, let me just start at the beginning. Back in 2000 and about 10, we were living in South Florida in a metro area, and I had parked outside of a elementary school. My son was a few years old at the time, to eat some lunch. I was working full time, and I just left my office job and went to go eat some lunch. And I packed a lunch, and so I was sitting outside of an elementary school, and the kids were outside playing for recess. So I totally looked like a creeper sitting there in my vehicle with the windows down, and I could hear what the kids were saying. And I'm talking about little kids. Like, this was an elementary school. These were little children. And the language was absolutely foul. The teachers were foul. Everything about the entire lunch hour was foul. And I just remember thinking to myself, wow, this is a really terrible school. It must be because we're in like a metro area, right? I think that probably every person who's gone from public school mentality to homeschool mentality has gone through this, where you're like, not my school. Yes, your school, all schools. So I'll get there. Hang on. So I came home and I was talking to my husband about it, and I was like, wow, we need to move. We need to move. We can't. I was listening to these kids. He can't go to this school. This was a school that we were zoned for. And we couldn't really afford to live where we were living anyway, because it was, South Florida, and we were a dual income family, but I mean, daycare alone was eating my entire paycheck plus some. So we just started kind of looking at some of our options, and it just so happened that the housing crisis, or the financial crisis of like 2009, 2010 was really starting to hit its peak in South Florida. And the house that we were renting had gotten foreclosed on. So we did not have much time to make a decision about what we were going to do. So we decided we were going to move a little further north into a more family friendly area. So we did. We moved about an hour ish north to a little more rural area, a little more family friendly area, and we started renting a house. And then a bunch of things happened. My son was in a VPK at the time, which for if you're not in Florida, that's voluntary pre-kindergarten, which is like fours, I guess, threes and fours. And it's not compulsory here; it's just voluntary. I loved the idea of being able to come home and not have to take care of my child. Let's just call it what it is. I love the idea of dropping him off in the morning at school and then not having to think about being a mother for a few hours while he was away, while he was being babysat essentially. So there was something so freeing in that. I got to work out. I lost so much weight because I was working out and really taking care of myself because I was very selfish. I was very focused on me during that point in time. And then I would go pick him up at noon, and then it would be a slog because I would have to be a mother. And again, I'm going to remind you that I was not really a Christian. I had done a fire insurance prayer back in 2008. Then I had started going to church about 2012. And this was right about the time that I started going to church, was when I had put my son in VPK. And my husband was completely on board with it. Both of us were very, very invested in being dual income, very invested in having that upper middle class lifestyle, very invested in looking like we had it all together. The reality was is that our lives were falling apart. We were in an intense amount of debt trying to keep up with the Joneses. Our marriage was hanging on by a literal thread. And I hated my life. I hated being a wife. I hated being a mother. I hated cleaning. I hated all of it. And I was unaware. I was very unaware at the time that God was going to do an incredible work in me by changing my heart about all of these things. So what ends up happening is about 6 months after we moved to this more rural area, and my son's in VPK, my husband's job gets put on the line, and we're basically told he can either take a new job somewhere else or he can just be laid off and deal with it. And so things were just super tumultuous at the time. It was a very crazy time in Florida. And so we decided to move to Alabama where he could get a job where the unions couldn't really mess with his job at all there. So we moved to Alabama. We had about 3 weeks to pack everything up, find a place to live, and go. And so we did. And because I only had 3 weeks to find a place to live in Alabama, and we moved to inner city Birmingham, Alabama, I knew that my son wouldn't be going to school there. I toured the school that we were zoned for in Alabama, and the same thing happened. This was an inner city Birmingham school. It was highly rated, but walking through the halls, listening to the way the teachers talked, listening to the way the students talked, it just was not going to happen. My son was not going to have a filthy mouth like that, which is funny because I had a filthy mouth at the time. And I couldn't see him. I couldn't see him surviving. I knew my son had a tender, sweet little heart, and I couldn't see him surviving in that sort of scenario. So I came home and I was really discouraged, and I said to my husband, I don't think our son can go to school here. Um, you should have heard the way that the people were talking. You should have heard the things that they were saying. You should have heard the way that they were acting, the way that these little children were dressing. And he was like, okay, so what do you want to do about it? And I was like, well, I don't know. And he said, well, we could always homeschool for a year because he was just like 5 at the time. And he said, so we can just homeschool for a year because it's not compulsory. School wasn't compulsory yet. And I was like, oh, do I really have to? This was not a me idea. I did not want to homeschool. So anyways, we did because we were in an apartment in literally the ghetto. We were in a Section 8 apartment, and we were the only people paying rent. I'm not even, that's not even hyperbole. We were the only people paying rent. It was the only open apartment I could find, um, that could fit us in such a short period of time. It was super scary. Like I couldn't take him out to the playground or anything like that. We would find hypodermic needles just laying around on the playground equipment, and there'd be very young children still in diapers, just in their diapers in the winter, completely unsupervised outside. It was very scary. Um, Cops were called all the time. There were shootings in our apartment complex. It was rough. Okay, so we dealt with that for about 6 months before we found a house that we could rent. And so we moved to the best neighborhood outside of Birmingham. Like this was the neighborhood that, like, if you lived there, you were doing great. you were you were considered like the cream of the crop. Now we couldn't afford to live there, so we found a pretty inexpensive rental, and that school zone was the best school zone in Alabama, literally the top school zone in all of Alabama. So I was so excited because I toured the elementary school, and I just knew that this was it. I was going to have my freedom again. I was going to be able to start another business. I was going to be able to just breathe. I wasn't going to have to be a mother. I was going to be able to drop my kid off and have somebody else do the mothering for me from, 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. And then I could be part-time mom when he got off the bus. And as long as he was not in my home, I didn't have to worry about it. And again, I'm just being very honest here. That was exactly the worldview that I had. Um, I viewed motherhood, I viewed being a wife, I viewed being a homemaker, I viewed it all beneath me. I was very, very into feminist dogma, very into girl bossing, very into I make myself, I am my own woman. So if you can relate, then you'll understand what I'm saying. If you don't relate, praise God that you don't know what it's like to be stuck in the feminist echo chamber that is, girl, wash your face, go get a job, you do you, boo, that kind of thing. It's so silly to think about it now. I completely regret that. I completely regret that era of my life, but I'm glad that it's over with and that God has saved me out of it. So, anyways, we enroll. By this time, it's second grade. Like we go from this is like I homeschool for about a year-ish, a year and a half, something like that, and I'm able to enroll my son into second grade into the best school in the state of Alabama. And let me tell you, it was a massive wake up call because I was volunteering all the time. I was in the school all the time. I wanted to be the mom that looked like she cared. So I was on the PTA. I was volunteering in the library. I was volunteering in my son's classroom all the time. I was buying supplies for his teacher. I was the room mom. I took all the pictures and did all the snacks and all the things. And the reality of all of that is that while it was nice to do that, and that I'm glad I got to do that, I was doing that for me. I was doing that so that people would believe that I was a good mom. I was doing a lot of that so that people would think on the outside that I had it all together, while on the inside I was just crumbling. Everything about me was crumbling. So that's where public school started for us. So second grade. It took 6 months for the public school to completely destroy my child. And he went from a very loving, very happy go lucky kid, very curious, super intelligent, very bright, to a shell, to a literal human shell. His teacher, his second grade teacher there at that school, had told him that he would never be a reader. He wasn't going to be smart enough to be a reader. He would bring books to school. Now I knew he was reading at a good level because I had taught him to read at home. And he would bring books to school, and the teacher would quiz him about his comprehension on these books. And because they were above his level, he didn't really comprehend what he was reading, but he could read it. And then she would belittle him. And I had seen this a couple of times. And when I asked about it, I was told to stay out of it. And then I got asked to no longer be volunteering in the room. So I volunteered everywhere else in the school. I just wasn't allowed to be in the room. And then some behavioral issues started to manifest. He couldn't sit still. He couldn't stop tapping his feet. He couldn't stop tapping his pencil. He didn't want to sit for circle time. A bunch of different things. So the school wanted to start testing for ADHD or autism. And then he fell on the playground. He fell and he broke his wrist. And they sent him home on the school bus and never called me that he fell and he broke his wrist. One of the aides on the playground saw it happen and tucked a note in his backpack. I'm talking about a 7-year-old child. Walked around at his recess was first thing in the morning. So he walked around all day with a broken wrist and he was crying and complaining about it. And his teacher told him to shut up and all the wonderful things that his public school teacher told him. And the school nurse told him that there was no way it could be broken because he didn't fall hard enough. And my son was not a liar. He's always been very truthful. So anyhow, he comes off the bus and he's just in tears and he's crying and he's holding his wrist and his wrist is all swollen. And I asked what happened and he said he fell. And I said, when did you fall? He said, I fell at recess. And so I'm like, okay, well, come inside. And I give him an ice pack for his wrist. And then I'm going through his backpack to see if there was an incident report, because if anything had happened, they would send little nasty letters home in his folder, like Austin talked during quiet time today, or Austin couldn't sit still during story time today, or all these little things. And now he could read. So he was reading all these little notes that his teacher was sending home about how he was such a bad kid. And I did not realize what that was doing to him. I again was very selfish. I did not have any idea of what that school was doing to my child. And what I need to convey is that it wasn't the school. It wasn't the building. It wasn't the location. It would have been any school. It would have been the inner city school. It would have been the A school. It would have been the rural school. Any school would have broken my child, because the school doesn't care about your child. The system doesn't care. And I found out firsthand that the system doesn't care about your child. What they wanted to do is they wanted to diagnose him so they could get him on medication so that they could make him compliant. And the thing is that he didn't have ADHD and he didn't have autism, and he doesn't have any behavioral issues, and he doesn't have any attention issues. He's not on the spectrum. He doesn't have any sensory processing, anything. What the issue was is that he was a 7-year-old boy who didn't want to read Pinkalicious books, which is what the teacher was reading during their story time. So he didn't want to hear about fairies and Pinkalicious dresses and things like that. And so he would get up and he would go get his own book. And then the teacher would tell him that he couldn't read, so he didn't need to bother picking out a book. And that was what he was dealing with every day during his stint in the public school prison pipeline. If you're a teacher and you feel offended, I don't apologize. I'm sure there are some fantastic teachers out there. I'm sure they're just really few and far between. I don't care. I don't care. This is exactly what happened to us. And the system was brutal. It was brutal. So anyways, going back to the broken wrist, that happened on a Friday. Monday morning, I found an orthopedic surgeon who would see him Monday morning. Tuesday, I brought him into school. The principal and the teacher and the guidance counselor were there waiting for me. And the first thing the school nurse said was, "Oh, you found someone to put a cast on that?" And I lost it. Keep in mind, at the time, I am a baby Christian. A baby Christian. I lost it. I was not very Christ-like. So I withdrew him basically immediately. And then we homeschooled. And so here we were in the best district in the entire state. And it was like the worst experience. And I praise God for it, because it taught me that it wasn't the location, it was the system. We were in the best school, in the best district, in the best neighborhood, the top performing, the people with the most degrees and the most letter behind their names. And everybody just was so shiny, happy people, and there were beautiful murals on the beautiful ceiling or on the beautiful walls at the beautiful school, and it was all filth. All of it was public school filth. And so I have to laugh because I just remember being so impressed with the facilities and being like, "Oh, this is amazing." And then how dark it ended up all being, all for, what Satan meant for evil, God worked for good. And that would be the story of our homeschool journey. What Satan meant for evil, God worked out for good. So that is how we got to homeschooling. So my son did a 6-month stint in the prison pipeline called public school, and then we pulled him out, and I didn't know what to do. I had already taught him to read, and I taught him basic arithmetic. So I figured I could do it. I just thought, okay, I'm going to find some people who know how to homeschool. I'm going to hang out with them, and I'm going to figure it out. But at the time, I was working more than full time. I was running a business. And this is where my worldviews collided. This is really where the rubber hit the road. We had paid off a fairly significant amount of debt, and I didn't need to work the way that I was working. And I would even almost argue that while we were in debt, I still didn't need to work. I think I can look back at it now and realize that me working kept us in debt longer because we had the illusion that there was always going to be money coming in. We had the illusion that we could take more time to pay things off, and we could be more willy-nilly about our expenditures because we had two incomes, and that's just not really the case. So, but I think that might be another story for another time. Anyways, um, I really ended up having to dismantle my worldview. I had to dismantle girl bossing. I had to dismantle all the feminist belief systems that I still held on to. And the truth of the matter is that feminism and Christianity cannot coexist. Feminism is communism, and communism and Christianity can't coexist. They exist in different universes. And so I found a group of special needs homeschoolers, and I joined them. And that was the only group of homeschoolers I could find in my school district because it was the best school district in the entire state. Like, people, there were bidding wars over housing in this particular school district because people wanted their kids to go to this system. So the only people who weren't homeschooling, or the only people who weren't putting their kids in the public school system there, were the people who the public school really couldn't accommodate, and that was mostly special needs students. So I did find a homeschool co-op, and the first co-op we joined was mostly special needs students, and my son wasn't autistic or anything like that, so a lot of the people couldn't understand. A lot of the people that were in this co-op couldn't understand why I wanted my son to be in their co-op with them. No, he's normal. I was like, yep, he is. But that was a massive blessing in and of itself. The very first group that we joined was so accepting because they themselves had not been accepted. And so it was like a welcome home sort of hug. And my son at 7 got to learn about people with all types of different abilities and compassion and empathy and all kinds of things. And so it was absolutely what God ordained at the time. So it was phenomenal. It really was phenomenal. It ends up that we homeschool in Alabama for just a few years before we get the opportunity to move back to Florida. And when that happens, we rushed to move back to Florida. We were just waiting. We were just biding our time until we could get back here. And as soon as the opportunity presented itself, we did. And because I was homeschooling, I could literally just pack everything up and we could go. I had we didn't have to wait for a school year to end. I didn't have to feel bad about pulling him out of his classes or his activities or anything like that. I was really sad to have to leave that first group, though, because the parents had taught me so much about what homeschooling could look like. Because in my head, I believed that homeschooling needed to look like public school at home. because I am a product of public school and my husband is a product of public school. I believed what public school taught us, and that's that only the school can teach you. If you don't have a degree, you actually cannot teach. And it's kind of amusing now because a lot of states have actually removed the degree requirement for teaching. So now you don't even have to have a degree to teach in a lot of schools. So that's ironic. There's something there. Anyhow, my biggest regrets were in those first few years. So I kind of want to talk about that. My number one regret was trying to do public school at home. I got when we decided that we were going to homeschool, what I did is I went out and I bought like a box of curriculum, a boxed curriculum, and I researched it to death. What's the best curriculum? What's going to be the best for whatever? And here's the deal, the curriculum doesn't really matter. As long as it's a Christian worldview curriculum, it's fine. That's the deal. And I hate, like, I know that people absolutely hate hearing that because everybody's got their curriculum that they're die hard about. But I think what's more important is that you just stick to something. You just stick to something. It doesn't really matter what it is, just stick to it. But because I was very much in the mindset that school looked like 8 to 3 with a recess and lunch, and you would cover like 8 subjects in that time, and you would allot 50 minutes to each subject with a 5-minute break or 10-minute break in between, and blah 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 blah. And let me tell you, that's not how homeschooling is. There are probably people that homeschool like that, and there might be some people that enjoy it, but we were miserable. Absolutely miserable. I was miserable, my son was miserable. And I was thinking, man, if this is what homeschooling is, I don't want to do it. I will just put him back on the bus and let him be somebody else's problem. And again, I'm just being honest here. It was horrible. I was a horrible person, a horrible mother. I had horrible views on motherhood and what training up the next generation was supposed to be. I was very much just a mainstream, mainline. I called myself an evangellyfish now. That's what I would say I was. Whatever culture was doing, I was willing to do it too, and just sprinkle some Jesus sprinkles on it and call it Christianity. Very different now, of course. So, I think that would be my top regret. My top regret was attempting to do public school at home. What I should have done and what we eventually did do was unschooling or deschooling, which is where you toss the curriculum out the door. You just say, no, we're actually not going to do any curriculum. We're going to read books that we enjoy. We're going to watch some documentaries. We're going to go to the library. We're going to take a lot of hikes. We're going to spend a lot of time outside. We're going to learn about things that you love. You as the teacher and your children as the students. What are the things that they love? And here's the truth, I didn't know my son because I had let other people raise him. He was in daycare, he was in preschool, and then he was in public school. Minus the about year and a half that I did the homeschooling. Um, and basically, I just taught him to read and write and count. I figured if I could do that much, well, then at least he would be at grade level when we found the school he was going to go into. But I didn't learn who my son was in that time. I learned how to be a public school teacher. I learned how to get him to read. I learned how to get him to write, and I learned how to get him to do math, and he didn't like any of it. And I just thought, wow, no wonder nobody wants to homeschool their children because this is horrible when we were trying to do public school at home. So my advice would be don't do public school at home. There are a million different ways to teach your children. None of them are 8 to 3 in a desk switching through subjects every hour. That's horrible. So, another one of my big regrets would be trying to keep up with some sort of arbitrary schedule. And by that, I mean looking at the standards and saying, okay, the standards for a second grade student are here. And I can see that, when I have my child take a standardized test, he's here for this subject and here for this subject and here for this subject. Well, the secret is that people are asynchronous learners. People learn different things at different rates because they have different interests. And so my son learned to be a voracious reader because he loves books. He does not really care that much for writing. So he just didn't want to learn to write. He didn't care about it, didn't think it was important. We fought tooth and nail over it. And the secret there was that when I stopped fighting him about it and waited until he was actually ready to learn to write, he learned. And so I hear this comment a lot from friends who have young children and they're trying to get them to read, young children, 5, 6, 7. And they're like, they're just never going to learn to read. Yes, they will. You will not launch a homeschooled adult who can't read unless they have some sort of disability that means that they can't actually read. Your 10-year-old will read. They will figure it out. When they want to learn something that really truly interests them, they'll figure it out. And I think like we get so caught up in this arbitrary schedule that children have to advance and develop their academics in this linear fashion. Like you do A and then B and then B and then C. And then when you've mastered C, you do D. And here's the thing, that's not even how you learn. That's not how I learn. When I need to know something, I Google it. I go look it up on YouTube and I learn. I learn from people who know what they're doing off of YouTube. And there is literally nothing I learned in high school, in public school, that I use to this day that I could not have retaught myself in 30 minutes or less. When I had to relearn algebra to teach my son algebra, I retaught myself in about 30 minutes because I was very motivated to learn it. And that is exactly true for your children as well. When they are motivated to learn the thing that you want them to learn, they'll learn it. I think another one of my big regrets, and this would probably be the main one, would be not focusing on character training first. I was very into the academics. I was super, super into the academics. Like he needs to know this, and this, or he's not on second grade level or third grade level or fourth grade level. And it really wasn't until we hit middle school, so sixth grade, that I realized that I had missed probably the most important thing that my child needed to learn, and that was character training. And it wasn't that he was a bad kid, because he wasn't a bad kid. That's not the thing. The thing is that I missed those little years where I could have been teaching him things, not academics, where I could have been teaching him about patience, about courage, about diligence, and so we actually ended up having to take a year, I think it was sixth grade, where we just paused academics entirely because I realized that there were some major character flaws developing in my son, and it was my fault because I had been a lazy mother. I had just been so focused on keeping up with the school system, on keeping up with this arbitrary schedule of academics, that I completely missed the character. And again, I have I have to give myself some grace in this. I will own what's mine to own. And that was that I was a selfish mother and I was not good at raising up my child in the fear and admonition of the Lord. I was not, but I wasn't Christian when we started either. So there is some grace there. And it has evened itself out. It's been rough. I won't lie. The teenage years are brutal because I didn't lay that groundwork, that foundation of character and habits when he was a child, when he was young. And so we have to do it. We had to do it now. We had to do it at 13, 14, 15. And that is much harder than character training a 5, 6, 7-year-old. So if you have young children and you are thinking about homeschooling and you're really deciding what a Christian education looks like, and I'm not even saying that homeschool is the only way your child can get a Christian education, but I do believe that homeschool is probably the normative way that your child can get a Christian education. Because I don't know about you, but if in my area, we have one classical Christian school that's not a school, it's a homeschool hybrid, and that's it. We have private Christian schools, but they accept state funds, and they have worse problems than the public schools do because they take the kids in who get kicked out of public schools. So those are not schools that I'd be willing to put my child in. That's neither here nor there. the commandment is that you must give your child a Christian education. And that's as you walk by the way, and as you sit, and as you lay down, and when you rise, and when you go to bed, your child must be getting a Christian education. And so for most people, the normative of that will probably be homeschooling, unless you have some sort of classical Christian school nearby that you can afford. But that's probably not the majority of people. So, my number one piece of advice, I think, would be focus on character training first. That would be my biggest regret, is that I was focused on getting him to read, write, and do arithmetic, and I missed shepherding his heart, really. I had to come back around to it as a preteen and a teenager, and that was much more difficult. I like to say that God knew what he was doing when he only blessed me with one child, as hard as that has been to be barren. Um, the ability to turn on a dime when I saw a character thing happening and stop and say, nope, we're going to work on this thing for now, has been, God's been gracious. God's been very gracious. All right. Is homeschooling hard? Yes, but not in the way that you might think. So, homeschooling is hard because you are it. Your husband, you're it. It's everything is your responsibility. And I know public schoolers hate hearing this. They hate it, but it's the truth. And I can say it as a public schooler. When you have someone to blame, you can blame them. So if your child is going to public school and they turn out to be children of Caesar, if they turn out to be secular, if they turn out to be hoodlums or whatever, if they turn out bad, you can blame it on the teacher, you can blame it on the system, you can blame it on the books, you can blame it on everybody who raised your child for you, because you actually didn't do the raising. And as a homeschool mom, you can't. As a homeschool mom, when you see some sort of character flaw or something happening in your child that you don't like, it's a direct reflection of you, and you don't get to blame anybody. So you actually have to do the hard work of raising your own children. And it is lonely, it's terrifying, and it is hard, but it is worth it. 100% it is worth it. The other ways in which I think homeschooling is hard is that I don't think it's hard now in the way that it was hard when we first started homeschooling, especially post COVID. After everything happened in 2019 and 2020, and so many people turned to homeschooling, it's so much more popular now than it was when we started, that I don't get any questions anymore on socialization. That used to be the big one, like, oh, how are you going to socialize your child? And I would have to be like, I don't want my child socializing with his peers right now, actually. I don't want them being the people that influence him. I would rather the people that love him the most, like his parents and his pastor, be the people that are influencing him. But you do you, boo. Lived by that model for a long time. Anyways, I don't think that homeschooling is hard in the same way that it used to be. I think now some of the challenges that we're facing is that the homeschool community is so diverse that when you get into a co-op as a Christian, you might believe that everybody in the co-op is Christian because it's a Christian co-op. That's usually not true. Um, so I think that has actually been the most difficult part of homeschooling, is just the assumption that if somebody else is homeschooling, that they are also instilling their children with the same type of values that you have. And it's not true. Don't be naive. I was very naive. I believe that. Um, is it all worth it? Abso-freaking-lutely. Absolutely. I would not change this for the world. I would not take the career that I left behind. I would not take any time to myself. I would not, even in the throes of absolute, this child is driving me bonkers because I can see his sin and he can see my sin. In the throes of I'm not getting enough help and I'm drowning, in the throes of, I don't know how to ask for help and I'm being stubborn and selfish, in the throes of all of it, I would do it all again. And I would do it again with less money and less help. I would do it 1,000 times over. Um, I would bend over backwards to make homeschooling a thing again and again and again. You will never, I will never, I can't speak for you. I will never regret the time that I got to spend with my son. I will never regret the moments of watching him recognize that he just learned something. I will never regret learning the things that I've learned myself. I will never regret being able to be the one who shaped his character the most. I will never regret being sure that every single thing, every piece of education he has received in terms of curriculum, in terms of documentaries, in term is something that I got to vet, is something that held my worldview, that shaped him to, that is shaping him to be a man of God. I will never regret any of it. I could tell you what I would regret. I would regret sending him to Caesar. I would regret it. I have three pieces of advice, actually. I don't have a number one piece of advice, but I have three pieces of advice. If you're new to homeschooling, if you've been homeschooling for a while, if you're thinking about homeschooling, if you don't even have children yet, but someday you may have children, these would be my pieces of advice to you. The first one, Google or look up on YouTube the sermon called Children of Caesar by Vodi Bokum. He is a pastor, and this is a very old sermon. I think it's probably 20 years old now. It will change your life. It will just change your life. I listen to this sermon once a year at least. It's on YouTube. I think it's 2 parts, but the first part's the most important. The fact that this talk, it's a speech actually, not a sermon. The fact that this talk is 20 years old and it's 80 times more relevant today than it was 20 years ago when he gave this speech is, it says something. It's enduring. That would be my number one piece of advice. If you're a Christian and you're wondering, should I be homeschooling? What does a Christian education look like? What's my responsibility as a parent to children as a Christian? That speech, Children of Caesar by Vodi Bokum, Vodidiebaucham. I might be saying his last name wrong. It's Bochum, maybe. Anyways, you will not regret watching it. It will become something that just is so convicting to you. In fact, if you don't want to be convicted, don't watch it. Don't watch it. My number 2 piece of advice is that if you are seriously considering homeschooling, I would highly recommend, especially if your children have been in the system, that you deschool/unschool for an extended period of time. You can do a quick Google search to find out what that would look like, but essentially it means throwing all the curriculum out of the window and learning who your child is. And then my third piece of advice is do it. Just do it. Pray about it. Talk to your husband about it. Let me encourage you. You will never regret the time that you spend with your children. You will not. You will never regret it. It will be hard. There will be days where you're like, why am I doing this, Lord? What are you teaching me here? And then 15 years later, when you have a 16-year-old child who is a joy to be around as a teenager, who people tell you all the time is the most helpful teen they have ever met, who can talk to anybody, no matter who they are, what stage of life they're in, whether they're young or old or have different beliefs, you will not regret having spent the time with your child pouring into them. You will not regret it. You will not regret leaving behind the career. You will not regret any of it. But what you will regret is seeing your adult child and knowing that they don't know the Lord, that they don't even know you, that they don't, like, those are things that you would regret. And I think that's about it. I'm sure I've said lots of things that I could expand on. I'm pretty passionate about this. I get pushback all the time. I still get pushback from friends and family for our choice not to put him into public high school after all these years of homeschooling and instilling him in great Christian values. The last thing I want to do is give my child to the public school system and say, here, take this master's piece and please spread garbage all over it. I think that would be a horrible idea. um, so yeah, if you have anything to add, if you have any questions, if you have any comments or anything, leave it in the comments down below. If you have anything negative to say, you can leave it in the comments below and I'll delete it. I don't care. I just don't care. Your negativity is not welcome here. um, if you have encouraging words for other homeschoolers, leave them in the comments below. Let me know how long, if you are currently homeschooling, let me know how long you've been doing it. If you are thinking about it, let me know when you do it. Let me know when you make the switch. And then, if there's any way that I can be praying for you in your homeschool journey, leave a prayer request in the comments below, and I will 100% make sure to add that to my prayer list. I am praying that this little video blesses you. I'm praying that it convicts you. I'm praying that it helps edify you. If none of this pertains to you and you just found it interesting, please share it with a friend that you think it would pertain to. The number one thing that you can do to help my channel, and I appreciate all of the new subscribers, the new likes, the comments. This has been a really fun little journey. But the number one thing you can do is share this channel with a friend that you think it might help. So if you have a friend who's been talking about homeschooling, maybe send them this video. All right. Well, again, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I love you. Bye.